Hello and welcome to part 38 of a video series on how to use Blender 2.7. In this video, we're going to be finishing this IK rig. If you did not see the last video, part 37, in which we started this IK rig, in other words, we created this half of this skeleton, I'll put a link in the video and in the description below right now. If you need to follow along with me in this video and you did not watch or follow along with the last video, you can go ahead and download this file that I'm starting with right now as it is. Alright, so let's go ahead and get started. In the last video, of course, we created this rig with a bunch of special IK target bones. And right now, since right now I'm in pose mode of my armature, if I grab those bones, they don't really do anything. And that's because we have to constrain the appropriate bones. That means add a special, what's called a constraint, sort of like a modifier in Blender, which makes one object, in this case bones, act in a certain way towards its target bone. Let's start with the hand IK bone. So what I'll do is I need to select the target first in pose mode, and then I hold shift and select the bone that I want to constrain to that bone. Now in this case we're selecting the hand IK bone, and I'm going to hold shift and select the lower arm bone because we want the lower arm bone to point always towards the hand IK bone. So I selected the hand IK bone first, hold shift, this bone. And what I need to do now is apply a constraint or a bone constraint to this bone so it points towards its target. Now I could do that over here in the bone constraints tab of my properties window. I could click on add bone constraint, and I don't actually ever do it this way. I'll show you a keyboard shortcut in a sec, and I believe it is inverse kinematics, this one right there. If I added this one, I could select the target. In this case I would click on my armature, that's the whole rig, and then I have to specify a bone. In this case I want to select hand IK.L, and you can search, so if I typed in HAND, that'll narrow down that list, so now I know it's hand IK.L. That's the slow way of doing this process, and I'll actually leave it like this for now. As you can see, when you add an IK constraint and you finish off what you need to add, in this case the armature and the specific bone, the bone that has the constraint becomes yellow, and that means it has this IK constraint on it. And now in pose mode, if we grab the hand and pull, you can see it's affecting a lot more than just the hand. Now of course this is not set up right yet, we've got to change one more thing, but as you can see it's sort of pointing towards that bone, that hand IK bone that I'm grabbing right now. But I'm going to right click to put it back in the right spot, and I'll press AA and Alt R, Alt G, and Alt S to get it back in the space that I want. Let's go ahead and go back to our front view. Why am I still experiencing any problems? Well, we'll figure that out in a sec. It's still slanted for some reason. I need to adjust the chain length of this IK constraint. What that means is basically when I grab the hand, I don't want it to affect the entire chain of the hierarchy of my entire mesh. I don't want to go all the way back down and move everything up until this bottom controller bone. I want to only affect the arm up to this point. Now how many bones is that? Well, that's 2 bones. Okay, so right now my chain length is set to 0, which means infinity, all the way up until as far as it can go. But I'm going to set it up to 1 and 2. And as you can see, that corrected the position of my armature since it got kind of messed up. So now as you can see, this little dotted yellow line, it only goes up to that point. That's the chain length, and now my hand IK bone will work properly. If I go into a side view or some sort of a orthographic perspective view and I grab it, you can see now that the entire arm will point towards this hand IK bone, and that's great. I'll right click to put it back to where it started. Now you might be noticing that when I grab the hand IK bone, the hand itself, which is actually going to be the bone that controls the mesh, and this bone aren't staying in sync. What I want to do here is actually make the hand bone stay in sync. In other words, copy the rotation of the IK bone. Now what that does mean is that I will need to rotate that bone, so it will kind of stay in the original position, but it means that I don't have to work with 2 bones. I can always just work with this hand IK bone. So I'm going to press A and A, and Alt R, Alt G, and Alt S to put everything back in the same spot. And I'm going to select the hand bone itself, and under this bone constraints tab, I'm going to go to add bone constraint, and I'm going to say copy rotation. Now it doesn't know what bone to copy it. It doesn't have a target. So I'm going to click on the little space where I can do that, and I'll click on armature and specify a bone. In this case, hand ik.l. Now these two bones start from the exact same position. They start both at the wrist, and they're both pointed in the same direction. And so there's no flipping going on. So now things should just work. The copy rotation constraint, it becomes green, or that bone becomes green because of that constraint. So now if I grab this bone, as you can see, the actual hand, which will be controlling the mesh, stays in sync, and I can rotate that. And as you can see, everything is just fine and dandy. I'll press Alt-R and Alt-G and Alt-S to clear everything out. Let's go ahead and talk about the elbow now. The elbow is a little bit simpler. There's no bone inside of a bone. In this case, we're just going to point this bone, the parent bone of the lower bone, to always point towards this bone when it can. So it's the same process here. I'm going to select the target first in pose mode. I'll hold Shift and right click on the bone I want to add a constraint to. This time we're not going to do it the slow way, I'll do it the fast way. The keyboard shortcut for adding a constraint, or the IK constraint, is Shift I on your keyboard. So I'll press Shift I. You have to select the target first and then second the bone that you want to add the constraint to. Shift I, add IK to active bone. Now this became distorted again because again I have to adjust my chain length. In this case I want a chain length of only 1, not 0, which is infinity, so I'll click on 1 up, and as you can see, things work properly now. So now what this is doing is this is acting like a target. So when I move the hand IK bone up, you can see that, you know, this arm is basically pointing back, which is great. But now if, let's say if I go to my top view, you can see that the arm is pointing straight back, which is great. But now if I grab the elbow IK bone and move it in a circle, the elbow points in that direction, which is really, really powerful and great to have, especially if you really want to specify exactly the pose of each limb. So that's great. I'll press A and Alt-R, Alt-G, and Alt-S to clear everything out. And we have the arm set up, including the hand and the elbow. Let's do the exact same process for the leg. So I'm going to select the foot IK bone first, and I'll hold Shift and I'll select the foot bone. We're adding the constraint to the foot bone. Actually, no, we're not. We're selecting the foot bone and then the lower leg bone. That's what's going to be pointing at the foot IK bone. And Shift I to active bone. And I need to, I'm not sure why that's turning gray. It's interesting. We need to turn the chain length up to 1, 2. And so now hopefully if I grab this bone, it's going to point. It doesn't know which direction to point in yet. What we might do is I might go into edit mode and point the knees forward just a little bit. In fact, I'm going to go ahead and do that. I'll press Tab to go into edit mode of the armature. I'm going to select the knee joint right there, and I'm just going to move it slightly forward. That's going to give an inherent direction to that knee when it bends. So now, without even controlling the knee IK bone at all or setting that up, if I just press G and move it up, you can see it bends in the right direction because it already has kind of a starting bend to it, and a very subtle one, so it won't affect our mesh very much. Let's go ahead and set up the knee now. Same thing here. We're going to select the target first, hold Shift, select the controlled bone just like I did with the elbow, Shift I, and to active bone. And of course my chain length is way off. It's only going to be for 1 bone. Aha! Yellow, when it is overlapped by blue, becomes gray, I suppose, in this case. So if I grab the foot IK bone and move it straight up, you can see that the knee is pointing towards that bone. If I move that bone from my top view, you can see that the knee will point at it. That is good and great. It doesn't really matter how far away you go either, although of course it makes sense to sort of just stay within a radius that's reasonable. So let's go ahead and clear all that out. Alt-R, Alt-G, and Alt-S. Now I believe that entire side of the body is correctly set up. If I want to sway my hips, I can now do that. And as you can see, it is making my hips sway. You'll notice that because these IK targets, the foot and the hand, are not attached, if let's say you want to move his hand up above his body like he's waving or something, you can do that, but you can also pull that bone away from the arm. Now, the hand is still attached and the mesh is going to be controlled by this bone. So you're not actually going to be stretching the mesh, but as you can see, it sort of makes it a process of where you might accidentally lose that bone, and that's just one of the issues with IK rigs. You can lose the controller bones off in space, but if you are familiar about how to use the outliner window, you should be able to, this is the armature, and everything that's a child of the armature is inside of this section, and so you could open everything up. The controller bone is a parent of everything. The pelvis is a controller of lot. And so you can open everything up and find a bone and select it, and then you should be able to move it back or know kind of where it is by looking at its coordinates in your N side panels. So that's just one of the issues with IK rigs in general, but I'm going to press Alt-G and Alt-R and Alt-S to get everything back to where it should be. Let's go ahead and flip our entire rig over. Now, we've set up this whole rig very precisely. That's great. We don't want to have to duplicate all of that work and do twice the work. We want to just be able to copy the rig, flip it over, and have Blender automatically readjust all the .Ls to .Rs. In other words, we named everything because it's on the left side with .L. Blender will actually do that for us. So let's go ahead and select all the bones on its left side. So I'm actually going to go into edit mode. I'll press tab, and I'm going to press the C, the circle select tool. The keyboard shortcut for circle select is C, and unfortunately once you do that, you can't orbit or change your view at all. So I'm in a good position now for my front view where I can see everything. I'm just going to paint my selection. So I'm going to paint over all these bones on this side, making sure not to select anything extra. And I've got them all selected. I'm going to press enter to move out of circle select mode, so now I can orbit and change my view if I need to. Now I have all these left bones selected, and I want to make a copy of them and then flip them over the middle point in our mesh. So what I'll do is I need my 3D cursor to be in the middle of my character again. So I'll press Shift C on my keyboard, and that will move it to the middle. It'll also zoom out to see everything again. That's fine. So now what I need to do is change my pivot point to be where this 3D cursor is. And the way you can change your pivot point, normally when you have a bunch of things selected, it sort of rotates things around the center of what you have selected, the medium point. We want to change the pivot point, in other words, where things rotate and flip around, to be the 3D cursor, and that is right here on your header of your 3D viewport. The default option is medium point, but if I click this button, I can change my pivot point to the 3D cursor. Okay, so now as you can see, the gizmo kind of goes to that 3D cursor, and what I need to do now is duplicate this side. So I'll press Shift D on my keyboard to duplicate the entire side, and I'm going to right click to snap it back to where it is, which is sort of dangerous because now we have two bones for all of these selected bones that are in the exact same spot. But that's okay, because right now what we need to do is press S to scale, and then we want to scale only on the X axis, so I'll tap X, and then I'll type -1 and press enter. So I'm going to do that whole process again. I have my duplicated bones. I'm going to press S, and then X, and then -1, and then I'll press enter. So now everything should be exactly copied on the other side, but all these bones are named .L.001. I could check that by going to them all, but they're all selected right now. So I'm going to have Blender automatically rename these all to .R and get rid of that .001. So down here in the armature menu, again, we're still in edit mode of this mesh. I'm going to go to flip names, and that is because Blender is smart and it'll recognize the .L and change everything to .R. So now I've got shoulder.R, I've got arm lower.R, I've got foot IK.R. Everything is just the way it should be, and our rig is finished. If you want to pause at this point and do a quick save, I will. I'll do a file save as, and I'm going to do a quick save. So I'm on version 12 right now. I've made some extra saves along the way, and I'll press plus, and I'll save this as version 13. Now we need to fix some things in our mesh because we do not right now have the geometry to deal with the number of joints that we have. If I go and press tab to go back into object mode or pose mode of the armature, I select the mesh and I press tab, you can see that we don't have nearly enough edge loops and edges to work with feet. There is no joint at the ankle right now. Some of my joints, because I moved this one, aren't in the right spot. So I'm going to do some more cutting. So I'll just quickly go through this. I'm going to select all 3 of these edge loops, just like I did with the other 3 in the last video. And I've got my pivot point still at my 3D cursor. So I'll change that back to median point. And I'm going to move these up to match exactly or approximately where that knee joint is. And I've got one on either side to make that work. I need to now make a cut around where the ankle joint is. So I'll move that down there and I'll click. Now I need to make one on either side of that one. So I'm just going to bevel it, Control B, and again it's all the way around, as you can see. So let's go ahead and press Control B, and to make one where it originally was, I'll scroll up on my mouse, or I'm on a Mac, so I'll scroll down with natural scroll direction. And so now I've got, you can make as many as you want, as long as you have one right in the middle. So you need an odd number of cuts, so I'll just do, or you need an even number of cuts, so just 2. So I'll maybe do it like that, right there. Let's go ahead and copy it on the other side. So Control R, click, and put it right there. Control B, and I'll scroll up or down once to make it one more cut, and I'll try to match the other one as closely as I can. That looks close enough. Same thing with the wrists, so I'll do one over here, click, slide it down. You'll notice that I'm distorting my UV map, so that is an important thing to fix. You're going to need to re-unwrap your mesh, but I might do that very quickly at the end of this video. So Control R to cut, and I'm moving it down to right about there. Click, Control B to bevel. I'll pull it away, scroll up or down once, and I'll make it a little bit bigger than that. Let's do it like that. Okay, great. Control R, click right there. Control B, scroll up or down once, and right about like that. Now you might want to use some, if you might want to go back and just do one side and then flip it over using the mirror modifier or using symmetrize like I've talked about in previous videos in the series, that's probably a better thing to do. I did not make these two sides exactly the same, so I do lose some ability to do things like X mirror with my mesh. So just to keep that in mind. I need to add some cuts in my body as well. Now I need to make a cut in the middle, and actually I want some cuts going up and down so he can shrug. This can bend up and down. So what I'll do is I'll put a cut right in the middle, up and down, click, right click, and then I'll bevel that, Control B, and maybe I'll put it right about there, and I'll scroll up maybe a couple times so I get 5 cuts instead of just 1. And that looks about right to me. We need to make a cut right here at the top of the hips and right here at the bottom of the ribs. So Control R, click, and you see I'm distorting my UV map again. Control B, and I'll space those out. That looks pretty good to me. I have to make a cut right there as well, so I can't go too far. And then Control R, click, right there, Control B, scroll up once, and that looks pretty good to me. Do I need to do anything else here? I could make a few more cuts up here to deal with the shrugging, so I might do that. Click, and then let's just go right in the middle, right click, and then Control B. That looks pretty good to me. I might make a few more cuts around the upper part, so in case he's shrugging, this bone might do a few, distort this a little bit. That's totally up to you. Maybe I'll just make one right in the middle, right click, Control R, click, right click, and I think I'm pretty much done. Let's do a double check. I've got some cuts for my ankle joints, my knee joints, and I think it's about time to parent the mesh to our rig. So I'll press Tab to go back into object mode of the mesh. We are in pose mode of the rig. That's totally fine. So I'm going to select the mesh, hold Shift, select any bone in the entire armature for the rig, and I'll press Control P, and we're going to say with automatic weights. Now, as you know, this might do a really terrible job. It might parent the wrong vertices to the wrong bones, and it might shear my entire mesh. But again, it's really important that bones like this, the IK bones, do not have deform checked. So I'll go down and just confirm that. Yes, deform under the bone tab is dechecked. So this bone's actually not going to pull on any vertices. That's great. So again, mesh, hold Shift, select a bone, Control P with automatic weights, and now we should be able to pose the character. If I grab his hand IK bone and grab it up, I can just pull it up. I gotta make sure I'm kind of going in the direction that's reasonable, and then I need to rotate that bone and I've pulled it out too far. So now I can get it like that. And I might use my rotate gizmo. I might switch over to local view. You could also use normal view. You might have noticed that before. Normal is very similar to local, but I suggest local. They both will keep your gizmo pointed in the direction generally of your mesh. Now that I've got his hand up there, I could point his elbow if I needed to, and that rotates. I'm not at all happy with the way that this is deforming. I think that some of the bones are doing some funny things, and of course the mesh needs to be re-unwrapped. And I'm actually going to end the video here, but I'll do a quick time lapse of me figuring out the UV map again. That'll be it for this video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.